This is the Rebel HR Podcast. If you're a professional looking for innovative, thought-provoking information in the world of human resources, this is the right podcast for you. All right, Rebel HR listeners, I'm really excited for today's show. We've got a couple of wonderful guests. I have Simon Greany and Sam Windsor from Elucidat. Elucidat is an organization that helps organizations respond to change more quickly by giving everyone the power to produce and manage effective digital learning, which is a hot topic, obviously, in today's environment. We are joined today by the wonderful Molly Burdess. So a big thank you to Molly for joining us today and helping co-host. So welcome, Simon and Sam.
Thank you, Carl. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you for joining us. This topic really spoke to me, and I really am excited to hear a little bit more about how you are pivoting during COVID, as well as leveraging some of the digital tools and resources that are out there. So why don't we start off, Simon, if you can just tell us a little bit about you and Elucidat.
Of course, yeah. So I'm one of the co-founders of Elucidat. So we're a cloud-based e-learning authoring platform. We make it easy for large organizations to train all of their employees online. So our vision is to build more successful, more ethical businesses through people-centered training. So for us, it's about a really positive effect of technology, helping people learn, transform, and change. So the way we do this is to empower anyone in an organization to be part of a preparing knowledge. You know, there's people all across organizations and where they're particularly globally spread or across vast territories who have something to share which could benefit other people in that organization to do something better or more efficiently. So enabling L&D teams to bring that knowledge in and make it shareable with others. So it's about bottling up knowledge, sharing it with someone else, very easy, so that it can be done more quickly and at a huge scale. So we specialize in scale. We're supporting over 70 million learners and working with organizations that are working with tens of thousands of employees. So you asked how are we pivoting? I think for us, this is more like our moment, our calling. You know, at the moment, we are providing digital learning, and there's now a huge surge in demand for that in organizations, where we've seen overnight things have been changed dramatically. You know, we had many customers who were still using predominantly face-to-face training methods, and that has had to change overnight. So we've seen people reskilling, upskilling. We've played our part in that. We've had a lot of interest in a program we ran to give away free training support for face-to-face to reskill and become digital online training experts. That's the kind of that's our kind of moment right now during COVID to really support people to do things a different way.
That's great. Sam, what is your role with Elucidat?
So I work with Simon in product marketing. So I work really closely with Simon as our chief product officer. And I've been with Elucidat for 3 years, but I've been in the e-learning industry for about 8 years now in a variety of different roles, often working directly with customers. So got a background in customer success and also project management for agencies as well. So I come at it with a real sort of customer angle and sort of like to learn from the people that we're working with and sort of their strategies for effective digital learning. And I've sort of taken that knowledge from the sort of my years in the industry and now focusing on my product marketing role, looking at that for how we can look to the future and help other organizations do similar things by taking those learnings from those direct experiences with customers that I've had in the past and helping other people replicate those successes. I'm in the product marketing space, but got a background working directly with customers and sort of, getting into the nitty gritty of L&D strategies and things like that.
So do you customize all of the learning and development? Do you have kind of a catalog of trainings that an HR practitioner could just go grab, or how do you approach that?
Yes, that's a good question. I mean, our sweet spot is really empowering the kind of embedded knowledge in organizations. That is kind of key to the way they operate. So that's not off the shelf. You can't buy that in. It's not on Google either. We see a lot of people in organizations reporting that Google is often the go-to to find the answers that employees need, but the answers inevitably aren't there, especially if it's an organizational kind of piece of knowledge. So for us, it's about the kind of knowledge that sits in that organization. How do they do things in a way that is culturally part of the way they operate, the way that they've developed processes which give them a competitive edge? How can those things be really bottled up and shared with others? So some compliance topics as well. That's a very staple part of what people would use Elucidat for. But it's those organisations that really want to put that across in a more personalised way, which expresses how their organisation needs to comply. So you're not just kind of saying, looking at kind of those kind of really bad kind of versions of e-learning where it's a iStock photo of someone that bears no resemblance to anyone in your organisation, following a process which is just not something you do. So I think real success of digital is a more personal experience, and so we enable these organisations to kind of think about learning and training as part of their brand and the employee experience of how they support staff. So so we don't provide any kind of pre-built content, but what we do is embed expertise in the design that we know works through our own research. So we have like wizards which help people compile learning, training that we know will be more impactful by the way it's asking them questions. So we are not a company that does PowerPoint import. We don't just take on a real world thing and transform that. And I think you see through COVID, that is many organizations approach. I'll just stick what we did in a face-to-face training workshop online in the PowerPoint, but it's you lose all of that experience that you'd have in a training room, and it just kills it. So for us, we don't allow that because it needs to be done differently, and it needs to be done quite simply and effectively. And it needs to be thought of in a new way. So we force people to think about how they can have a real impact on people and how they use their time most effectively. So our tools make it really quick and easy to develop that content, but it's kind of got that embedded design that we kind of add to it with our secret sauce.
Interesting. So you mean I shouldn't just send out a YouTube link and tell people to watch the video?
It depends what the YouTube link is, I guess, and how relevant it is. I think I think some of the content curation it can be really effective if that content is absolutely what that person needs. I think if they're finding a random YouTube clip to vaguely support the area they need to learn about, then that's where it gets risky. I think for the organisations, they are literally control of the employee experience and the knowledge that they need to foster to be successful.
Typically gamification, or is it, could I come in as an instructor and talk to my team?
We support asynchronous learning development. So these are, you produce a digital experience which is tracked and hosted so that people can access it when they want on demand. So it's not a kind of it goes alongside other sort of blended learning experiences and facilitation, but it's a standalone experience. Yeah.
From the learner's perspective, what changes have you noticed now that everybody is pretty much doing everything online, everything's virtual? Have you noticed any difference that the learner needs pre-COVID versus where we're at today?
Well, we noticed we collect a lot of data. We've obviously had 17 million learners. We have a huge number of people all the time using the system. So we do get some quite interesting data insights. We did notice that just kind of post lockdown kicking in for Europe and America, there was an increase in what people were learning, being trained on. So there was a moment where people were using that time. Maybe they were on furlough or being retrained to do something differently because of the quick changes that happened. So I think it's so interesting to see how organizations have been forced into at the kind of scale we're talking about, organizational change at a huge scale overnight. That's kind of unprecedented. So we've seen that kind of training can help support that gap and that journey. So that was something that we saw. we've seen a trend anyway of time getting shorter. So, we're advocates of not building long digital experiences. They should be broken up, blended with other things, and given the space they need. So we always advocate for less than 15 minutes. TED Talks are less than, around 15 to 16 minutes for a good reason. And we've certainly seen that the trend is going down in terms of the time that people spend on digital learning experiences. And that's been a more of an ongoing shift. Another shift going to mobile. We've heard for years, this kind of shift to mobile learning that we see in organisations. It took a long time for that to catch up, but we certainly see now that is a growing trend. I know in some states of America that's limited by the laws, which is, can be frustrating, but that's another sort of movement we've seen. Yeah.
It's a whole nother topic. LSA.
Yeah.
We don't have time for that.
No, we don't want to put anybody to sleep either.
I think for also just kind of the digital does present those opportunities. Kyle, at the beginning you were saying that there are a number of challenges and unfortunate things about the current situation, but also some opportunities to do things differently now. And the way we use people's time to learn and develop and to kind of be really kind of clever about that time is an opportunity, I think, now that we can really kind of build on, so that we're not just going online and doing a very long presentation for a couple of hours. Has that ever actually been that valuable anyway? We can really ask some of these difficult questions now and challenge things and look at the ultimate way of doing them.
Simon, you really burst in my bubble here. 8-hour orientation slideshow was really great, I thought. And then, everybody loves PowerPoints, right?
When you bring a new employee on and shove them in the closet with a screen and say, "Okay, here's your videos. Good luck." That's awful.
My favorite is the sitting there, like forcing them to sit there and like read the handbook and then like reading a policy to them. And then, the ultimate goal, the goal for an HR person is just make them sign that acknowledgement at the end, right?
Yeah.
That we covered it. But it's, what do they retain from that? Almost nothing.
You've put your finger on that. This does fire me up. I mean, this is kind of, I've been in the industry for years, and I think there's a kind of chucking the book at someone and then ticking a box is so unfair. And I was asked to do a project years ago where an organisation was doing that, and they no one read it, and people ticked the box, and therefore it was just a shifting of responsibility. And the way we re-engineered that was to distill this book into a game and use humour, and it went viral in the organisation. So from being something where they were the recipient of being bashed over the head with this book, they actually started to share this thing about the golden rules of health and safety in the organisation. It was actually something that people were talking about and wanted to do, and that was quite a turnaround. So it can be done.
I think it can switch off learners as well. Like if you're showing them as an expectation for them just to read something and tick it off and mark it as done. Like if I think back to my own experience when a really long time ago when I was a learner in sort of a part-time college job, I remember having to take some e-learning, and the manager was like, you just need to get to the end and make sure it's completed and then get back out and help customers. And I remember thinking at the time that does this organisation actually care about training? Because if an organisation has something that's really personal to the learner and really it's going to help, then it's going to make the learner feel that they're actually that organisation is spending money and time and effort to make their experience as an employee better. So I think it can be a turn off for the actual people that are consuming the learning or the training as well. So it is important to get it right, which is why Elucidat's philosophy is all about people-centered and enabling organizations to make it really sort of personal to the employees so that it can actually make a difference to their day-to-day.
Yeah, I think, Sam, that's a good point. And some organizations can get really scared about personalization. There's it's been a kind of growing topic in the industry for years now, a need to personalize, but it can sound so intimidating, but there's some really easy ways of doing that, and it's about kind of breaking down audience into different groups, and just kind of thinking about how you tailor that experience for those different people accessing it. And it can make a huge difference, not only in them being more engaged, but then also there's just how much time they're spending on it, because some groups may not need to go through the same detail. I think with a lot of these things, and people that are going new to digital transformation, it can sound really scary, but it's actually, if you break it down, it's doable, and it's better if you get it right.
Yeah, I'm curious. So my organization is an international organization, and so not only do we face the challenge of just geographic spread, but we also face the challenge of cultural differences, language differences, different learning styles. How do you approach that complexity and diversity within organizations?
Obviously this is something we specialize in, and we have in our own platform, we have localization technologies. So for language is one element of that, but then also adaptations to change it for different parts of the organization. So we've heard an expression being used now in organizations which is interesting. It's called connectors. So people at a regional level adapting what's come from the central L&D, HR in the business, and adapting it for these different parts of the business and territory. So you have a lot which is core to the main version that's going out. We call it variations. You then have these variations on the main version that sits in the middle. And so those versions can be tailored at a territory level. So sometimes that may be to take into account differences in the law, or how they change the way that they operate in a territory. It could just be visually how you're kind of recognizing an environment that's like the one you work in day to day, making it kind of authentic. I think there's some people think of e-learning as being needing to be very slick, but it's kind of good if you can use pictures that look real and like the environment you work in, and not of a kind of cheesy kind of image library, or even worse, clip art.
Clip art, yeah.
Just don't get me started on that.
I may have used that once or twice in my past. I think one of the challenges, from my perspective, at least in my background, is I went to school for business, and I didn't major in learning and development or adult education. But in our role, we're expected to understand the ins and outs and set up training and make sure that our employees are retaining knowledge and understand the expectations. And a lot of times I think a lot of us kind of fly blind and are just doing our best to try to make sure people get it. And so we, at least myself included, that means, well, I guess I should throw together a PowerPoint slide, or I should go buy this packaged sexual harassment training because it's something that I have to do in the state of New York. It's those are the types of decisions that are made. So what advice would you have for somebody who's maybe not a learning and development professional, but is expected to put a program like this together?
Yeah, so I mean, Carl, that's a really good example. I thank you for your honesty there. Can I ask you, what would drive you there to go to that off-the-shelf module that you kind of called out there? What would be your motivation for doing that?
Time.
Yeah.
Just lack of time or available resources to invest in a full-scale, bespoke, customized training course.
Yeah, I mean that's.
And because we are not the experts, so hopefully we're picking something or somebody that is.
Yeah,
right.
So they're both brilliant examples there of what the challenge is and what we respond to. So you're not the experts, you don't have the time, and it is difficult. Creating good e-learning in the way that we were describing it is hard, and to date it's required experts. So for us, we are taking on some of that design legwork to do the heavy lifting of the design, so that it's about then connecting experts with the tool to share that knowledge. So we call it Centre of Excellence. So in the case here, to address the challenge of time and expertise, you could commission and bring in your legal department to put the content into Elucidat. So it's a way of creating a collaboration so you can get what you need, but in a way that's not just having the book thrown at you. So not those examples earlier on where you are then just left with the book and the checkbox, but it's kind of encouraging, it's asking questions of the person who's contributing to give you something that's useful in HR to then be able to share with others. And the time invested there is worth it. There's a much better sort of legacy then that can carry forward in the organisation. It's more personal, more relevant, more engaging, but that you also own and can maintain yourselves.
One thing I learned very on in my career, I didn't learn it an easy way, right, is when you bring in an expert trainer is not to align them and prep them with the culture of your organization. Just be very clear about your expectations, but also what the team needs to get out of it. And then making sure who's ever training knows enough about your organization to make it relevant. And I think so many times that's what a lot of people miss.
In past company, I've had companies with large learning and development teams and some of those, really critical departments. But when, maybe we're sitting in a training and clearly one of the participants doesn't trust that person knows what they're talking about, and it just becomes, painful for the trainer because they typically a centralized resource maybe isn't connected with that specific location or not connected with that specific learner, that it gets kind of ugly. A great point, Molly. It's got to be for the right audience. It's got to be intended for the right audience. So
yeah, so what we sort of see is this kind of this move from sort of decentralized L&D HR to kind of a form where it's sort of centralizing the remit of what needs to happen in an organization to perform better, to develop, whilst then going back to be able to you kind of decentralize things by enabling these experts to come in from across the organization and be part of this collaboration. So we call it center of excellence. And that's not meaning that the center of the organization is the center of excellence. It means that they are empowering and bringing in people from all over the organization to be one big center of excellence. So it's about a kind of a huge collaboration opportunity so that you can do, as you said, make it relevant and make sure that the right people are contributing to something that's going to land with those audiences, so that you are then a kind of a guardian of quality, change, and commissioning. What needs to happen around the organization to foster that development of people.
One of my main concerns with everything going on is as organizations start to open back up, and time and money is limited, is that learning and development is going to be one of the first things cut. Are you seeing that at all?
No, we're not seeing that, but what we do represent is actually a kind of a more cost-effective way of training to the alternatives. So we are not affected in that way. But I think I think now clearly organisations across everything in their organisation need to look at how they do things more efficiently. So our product is definitely about a more efficient way of training people at scale. But then also the opportunity to do that better. And I think we talked earlier about, where there's some opportunities arising at the moment. There is an opportunity right now to think, okay, this digital transformation has going to be maybe thrust upon us in to this extent. But, here we have a way now that we can teach everyone asynchronously. We can dramatically reduce the cost per head of training. I mean, we're talking like cents rather than dollars per head. So it makes it more available to everyone in that organization. So actually what you see is an efficiency, but then an opportunity to make sure that everyone is supported well. So that's why the quality is important to us in the way we support customers, because if you're going to do something more cost effectively, it has to work.
I'm glad to hear that's not reducing. I personally think there's no better time for an emphasis on learning and development right now. I mean, what we're seeing is there's a lot of burnout happening, right? A lot of employee burnout, a lot of mental health issues. Like, people are struggling. And I think the more you can teach them and keep them engaged and keep them motivated to learn and do new things, I think the better for not only them personally, but also the business and the culture of the organization.
Absolutely, yeah, and actually, I mean, I think because of that level of change we're seeing, that it's the amount of reskilling, new procedures that people are following with social distancing. It's just so much that organisations need people to know right now, and there's no other way to do it than to kind of offer learning and development. So our sense is that it needs to be invested in by any organisation that wants to retain people and to develop their workforces. We've also had some interesting data about customers seeing that learning correlates with engagement and retention of staff. So seeing some very interesting data around that as well, about the benefits of supporting people in that way. To answer your question more directly, we don't have any kind of sense that the amount of learning or training will go down, but we are mindful that people need to think about how they do it more efficiently and effectively.
That's really interesting data that you're seeing some of these trainings be connected with retention and engagement and some of those factors. And I think about, an employee's experience and their perspective. When you're investing in training, you're investing in them, and you're giving them time, resources. You're paying for this training. Clearly you care about it, but they're also gaining a skill set. And I just think that especially as we've gone digital in a lot of our work processes, we've got to try to stay connected with each other. So if you don't have this type of connection, and you don't have a clarity on setting employees' expectations, helping them understand more about what your goals are for the organization and how they impact that in their job, perhaps it's compliance training, but even if we can help people understand why the compliance training is required, sometimes we ask that question as well. But if you can invest in people, I just think that they're going to invest in you, right? So I think it's a critical thing that we can't lose sight of, even though we are facing budget pressures as we face a potential continued global recession until a vaccine is developed, right? I mean, it's something that we've got to pivot into so that we can actually thrive as organizations through the pandemic, as opposed to just try to survive. I took that quote from Molly from one of our last podcast episodes. That was her face right now.
I was wondering why the expression.
I'll let you trademark that one, Molly.
Thanks, guys.
Can you provide me an example of an organization, and you don't have to name names, but just an organization that maybe came to you and said, I am struggling in this area and I need help to build this? What does that look like? And give me a story of somebody that's used your program for success.
One that always jumps out when I get asked this question from my days in customer success is we had an organization come to us probably about 2 years ago now, actually. So it was obviously before COVID time and stuff like that. So their challenge wasn't related to the current climate, but their challenge really was all about sort of what we've been discussing regarding Centre of Excellence and that theme, which is a big sort of messaging point for us at the moment. So that organisation in particular, they had multiple different tools that they were using to deliver e-learning. They were doing training in all different ways across the business. It wasn't very centralised, so the L&D team didn't have much control or awareness of what was happening in different regions and different departments. The organisation itself is a really huge organisation, talking hundreds of thousands of employees, based in multiple countries. And really they came to us with the challenge of, we're looking for a tool that will work across our whole business. We want something that's designed for an organization that's as big as ours, that can scale with us as we grow, and a tool that we can sort of open up and feel confident and trusting in terms of letting others in the business contribute to developing training. So it really aligned with obviously our sweet spot in terms of our product offering. And that organization, they came to us with quite a disjointed and sort of a disconnected sort of L&D environment. And through sort of their onboarding with us, we did lots of training and services with them to get them up to speed with how they can use Elucidat as part of their solution, how they can roll it out across the business and bring other teams on board with them as well. And there's a big sort of change management piece that we had to sort of work through with them to help them, to enable them to then enable their own teams as well, and sort of filter down the training that we were doing to get people on board, because we often find with customers as well, if they're particularly moving from one technology to another, there can be some resistance, and there can be a bit of anxiety, and people are a little bit scared about changing to a new tool when they've been using something else for many years. So our approach with those type of customers in those scenarios, and with this particular customer, is a really sort of a partnership-led approach. We like to think of ourselves as long-term partners with our clients rather than just selling them a piece of software. And that comes down to weekly meetings, quarterly business reviews, being really sort of giving lots of handheld support right at the early stages, and really helping them map out a strategy and a change management program to ensure that the rollout of a business-wide enterprise tool is going to be successful. And the results that we sort of saw with that client was high adoption. So those different teams came into Elucidat and started using it and delivering training programs pretty quickly. They saw an increase in learner satisfaction as well. One of the things that they were doing was sort of just really quick snapshots, 1 to 5 ratings after a training program on their learning management system, and they saw that Elucidat content was getting higher scores and higher engagement. And it was really by working closely alongside them and sort of calling out those little successes along the way that it was like a snowball effect, because others in the business wanted to get involved. They wanted to use it for their own team, and it made that central team that we started working with at the beginning just look really good, and look like they were a center of excellence, coming back to that theme. So that's the customer example that I always like to jump to. Their challenge was, in a nutshell, how can we do this at scale? How can we make it efficient? How can we have oversight and sort of know what's going on in terms of training across our business, but also empowering those divisions and those teams that are excited about training and want to keep up that momentum and sort of that buy-in. How can they balance those two things and not put them off by just mandating a whole new technology stack?
Well, we need all the help we can get in HR this year.
Yeah.
Great content. I'm really excited to check out the tool. For our listeners, we'll put the link to the website in the show notes, and they can check it out. But really innovative, and I think critical type of approach, and especially right now in today's world. So we're gonna shift gears into the Rebel HR Flash Round. So get ready. It's gonna be really challenging, hard hitting questions, and we're gonna put you under the white hot spotlight. So Simon, we'll start with you. Question 1: what are you reading right now?
I am reading. We are a team. We have 1 day a month of learning at Elucidat. Our values are learn, care, share. We're a learning organisation, so we have this day. And the book we're reading at the moment is called How People Learn: Designing Education and Training That Works to Improve Performance. So that's by Nick Shackleton-Jones. He sort of challenges the way we think about this, and it's quite provocative, kind of in the way he writes. So it's an interesting book, and maybe with Rebel HR, it's in the theme there. So I'd recommend that. But we're all looking at that at the moment, reading it and comparing notes as a team.
Question number 2, Simon: who should we be listening to?
Carl, like you, I do a podcast series called Learning at Large, and so I explore in that podcast the challenges of supporting organisations to enable people to learn at scale. In one of the episodes, I spoke to a person called Daniel Hunter, who's the global training manager of 350.org. So they are a campaign action group around climate change. And what was really interesting about that conversation was how he manages to motivate people to want to do something. So there's a lot of kind of stuff in there, what they do as a campaign organisation about kind of group, mass protests, how you create movements of people. And I think for, what I learned from that, it was so kind of outside of what we would normally be looking at in L&D, but so relevant. How do you get lots of people to really care about something and do something about that at a huge scale. I mean, we're talking like in one of the examples you shared, over 1 million people. So I've checked that out. I mean, it's a good podcast. It was one of the early ones I did, but I think for me it's quite memorable and it's quite interesting take on things.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll put the link to the Learning at Large podcast in the show notes as well, so that our listeners can check that out. Sam?
My go-to for this is always Josh Bersin. So a lot of your listeners will probably be familiar with Josh Bersin. He's a sort of an industry analyst, and yeah, he's someone that always makes me sort of sit up and listen when I see his posts on LinkedIn or on Twitter and things like that. So I really respect the stuff that he publishes and his insights on things.
All right, last question. This one's the hardest one. So Simon, how can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, probably the best way for me is on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, Simon Greany, Greamy. I do post on there, but I'm also happy to connect with anyone that's listening. I've got a Twitter account, but don't even go there. I'm hopeless updating it.
Sam, how can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah, exactly the same. LinkedIn, Sam Windsor. You'll find me under Elucidat. So yeah, LinkedIn's definitely the best way. I did have a Twitter account up until very recently. I've gone on a bit of a social media detox actually. So yeah, LinkedIn is the one that's still active, and I'd be happy to connect with any of your listeners there.
Detox. That sounds good right now. We're in the middle of the 2020 election, and
there's so much noise. So a
little bit of noise.
One of the things that I could cut out. So that's one of the things I decided to cut out.
I think more people need to do that in this world.
But yeah, we'd probably all be a lot happier if we didn't have that noise in our lives. Oh, great conversation. Really appreciate the time and the conversation. I think certainly some things that we can continue to focus on and improve through 2020. And it sounds like you might have some solutions here that we should all check out. So thanks for spending some time with us.
Great. Thank you for your time, Kyle. It's been really good to meet you both and chat about these things.
Thank you. Be well.
Cheers, and you take care. Bye.
Bye.
All right, that does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we have here. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.